So I won $190 betting on the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and Nozomi decided to reopen orders for the Utena box set around the time that I cashed out. So I found myself thinking today about one of my favorite animated films of all time. That's The Adolescence of Utena. What I'd like to do in this video is similar to what I've done in The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. That is a long-form critical look at the film, including comments on directing choices, shot compositions, thematic and symbolic formation, while still acknowledging the viewer's expectations and our reactions. We'll go through Adolescence quite literally shot by shot, and try and say something meaningful or helpful to anyone trying to parse this admittedly difficult film. A few allowances before we begin. Obviously, this should not be your first reference with this show or film. Go watch Revolutionary Girl Utena in its 39-episode entirety, enjoy Adolescence at face value, and then come back here once you've finished. It's a bit sad to limit our audience by making such an esoteric video, but I guess that's the price you pay. Not like we're going to monetize the video anyway. Frankly, I just hope Nozomi doesn't take it down. Secondly, we're going to make some references to other ideas in passing and to further our points. And those could possibly include Geek Knight's videos on understanding Revolutionary Girl Utena as a series, other ideas that I've read or heard about, my own talk on Grace versus Glamour in Sailor Moon and Post Sailor Moon Works, a video of which is on YouTube. And of course, I'll be using a lot of information from the life and times of Kunihiko Ikuhara. While we won't spoil Penguin Drum here, or Sailor Moon or Yuri Bearstorm, it may be a good idea to be familiar with them at least, as certain inevitable trends will emerge. Finally, would that I could be comprehensive. I like to think that I understand the Adolescence of Utena on a fundamental level, and I know a little bit about what Ikuni was attempting to go for, but I'm always sure that I'm missing something. I encourage you to think about this film and share your thoughts. There's nothing I enjoy quite as much as hearing different takes on something as abstract as Revolutionary Girl Utena. As we watch the intro of the film, I kind of want to talk about the space that we're intended to view this film in. Revolutionary Girl Utena, The Adolescence of Utena, is a retelling or an alternate version of the events of Revolutionary Girl Utena. At a number of points throughout the film, the show is going to call back onto our recollection of the events of the series. It may not be a direct reference like the Nanami scene, but it is, in many ways, a film that takes advantage of what came before it. And that's kind of odd if you think about it nowadays, and especially anime movies that are based on a series, they generally go with a recap approach, or if not that, at least something that is self-contained and digestible on its own. Adolescence, on the other hand, is going to play with your expectations. So as we open the film, I kind of want you to have that in mind. Who is this movie for? Is it for fans of Utena who already know the story and would understand the themes possibly? Or is it for fans of general anime and movies who maybe would lack a lot of context and be even more lost than most other people are? I can see wanting to split the difference, but I do think that the movie kind of ends up on the wrong side of both of those. Anyway, the first shot is bells. Bells herald a duel, bells celebrate things, bells are also rung when someone dies. My first thought of this shot is that there are too many bells, there shouldn't be that many bells, they're stark black and red, and that's kind of disconcerting. The way they fill the frame seems kind of chaotic, and they're moving back and forth not in sync at all. We get a nice cut to a contrasting shot of stillness of Akio and Anthe, where it's still very oddly colored, washed out, blood red on the left side and pure white on the other. The saturation kind of calling into effect the personalities of the two people that inhabit each side of the frame. Back to the bells, chaos again. Contrasted with the previous shot, shows that there's maybe chaos under the surface, or something brewing, something happening, clearly indicating something tumultuous and more than meets the eye with Akio and Anthe. It may be a bit of a stretch, but the negative space here of the black lines of the supports for the bells kind of reminds me a lot of the impalings that happen throughout the series of the witch, and then finally Utena at the end of the series. Then a cut back to Anthe again. Now this possibly suggests that Akio left Anthe, which I mean, knowing what we know, in a way he did. But I don't think so. I think it suggests more that one of the first couple shots was a lie. And since we know the fate of Akio, having watched the show already, we can tell that Akio is imagined in much the same way that Toga is. We'll talk a little bit more about the relationship between Toga and Akio later on, but just enjoy this shot here. Wow, aside from just the visceralness of the movement to kind of get the audience awake and engaged, you've got Ikuhara's trademark ridiculous architecture. I think the biggest clue there that this is not a real place, everything is a metaphor, you're not supposed to take this literally because these buildings can't be held up literally. Notary Academy was always a metaphor. Then you have the zoom out indicating that Anthe is a princess locked in a tower, that there's this huge distance between her and everybody else, that anyone that would want to get close to her would have to bridge all these crazy and labyrinths of architecture. Big shoutouts to the sound effects too, really putting the distance there and giving it an emphasis on the speed. The second part of this shot is very anticipatory and relies heavily on its timing and the sense of speed to create a feeling of unease or bubbling up in the viewer. It's an explosion. And it's capped off with this lovely tome at the end. All of this visual language kind of tells you that the scene or the climax here is incredibly important. Which is what? It's Anthe dejected on her knees in front of Dios. This obviously signals submission, but also there's a heavy element of sadness to it in the way of her posture of her back. Intradiegetically, the place for this scene would be the Rose Garden. And I want to bring up what happens at the Rose Garden later in the film, too. Utena and Anthe exit stage left. This is something I talked about in The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, but also some visual language that's used throughout this film as well. That in Japanese you read from right to left, so making progress is going left. Anthe here is facing towards the right, and she's bowing or collapsed in front of the representation of the ideal of the prince in Dios. Now, we, knowing the background in Utena, kind of understand that that's what this is and what Dios represents, but it's not quite clear whether he's a good thing or a bad thing yet. As this is our second or more times through, we can really understand that Dios here is holding Anthe back. That's kind of the climax of the film, right? Is Anthe escaping the idea of the prince. So I think if we take this and put it in the context of what we just saw here, I think the entire intro to this film is showing us Anthe and how Anthe is trapped and what that means in the visual language of this film. That's associated with male characters. It's associated with being locked within Otori Academy, deep within it, and facing towards the right. The roses in general, well, that's something we're going to talk a whole lot more about, but for now we can see Anthe enveloped by them. Do they signify her, or are they Dios, or something else? Let's hold on to that thought, and we'll definitely bring it up once we get to some later scenes, and including the best scene in the film. But I just want to say that, as of now, we can tell the quality of this movie. That it has already, using no dialogue, established all the symbols and the plot of the film without us even being aware of it mostly. We know that this film is going to be about Anthe struggling to escape from Otori Academy and the, I don't want to call it oppression, but the oversight, heavy hand, what do you want to say? The idea of the prince. And for her, that means Akio. Timeline-wise, this is not only the setting, but kind of the history and how we are to understand Anthe, is that she failed, or that she's not able to go to the left in the Rose Garden, get out of Otori Academy on her own. So the credits here really bring in the painting motif that's going to be an element of the middle of the show. And I think that we could maybe spend a couple minutes on each of these paintings individually. And heck, there's plenty of time to talk about all the other paintings that are going to come up. But I think I want to talk about the painting motif in general as being kind of a representation of something. Much like the way Ikuhara uses shadows in his shows, that paintings are an inaccurate thing. They're kind of a storybook, another motif that Ikuhara is fond of, that they don't represent reality. They represent what the painter was thinking. Now, that's a very powerful thing because I think that's a large part of what Ikuhara does in his storytelling. Whatever happens in Revolutionary Girl Utena isn't to be taken literally or at face value. Instead, it's more a representation of what the characters are going through and how they're perceiving the world around them. Basically, like a painting, everything's a sick mockery of whatever struggles you're going through. Also, the title of the film, Adolescence of Utena, in some ways it's a very complicated and very obscure film, and in other ways it's so very obvious. This is a movie about adolescence or growing up or, finding your way through that time period. And that's kind of the context we're dealing with here. It's high school, before your identity is set in stone. Also, I love the directorial choice in this scene to kind of leave the paintings very small and in the center of the frame, as it makes it seem like you're kind of staring into it, like you have to squint into it, like this very small representation of a lie of what was going on, or one interpretation of what was going on at the time the painting was painted. And yeah, that's very apropos of kind of getting to know each other and the struggle that Utena and Anthe go through. This painting gets a thunderclap and is alone on screen, signifying that it has more importance than anything else. The symbols here are the castle, which, is a large part of the climax, a man standing in a doorway, or some figure standing in the doorway before light, and then the rowboat adrift in the water, which is relevant to Toga and Utena's storyline, and not really to Anthe like the rest of the pictures were. It's also the picture that Ikehara decides to put his name on top of. I think the figure shrouded in light inside of the castle can be thought to mean a number of things, either the concept of the prince, Dios, kind of holding everybody back and saying, come here, or it could be Anthe stuck inside there. Though I don't like that as much because the figure itself is black, and Anthe isn't really represented as being dark. Well, now that I think about it, there is that one scene. Anyway, the rowboat invites Utena into the story. That's how she ends up trapped here. How she comes to be in Otri Academy is her idea of the prince and Toga and the drowned kid. And I think that's a very nice transition into the sound of the gears turning, which can equate to thinking, and the, again, chaos of filling the screen of the blackboards flying across everywhere. And then we cut to Utena, who's lost deep in thought of or something. And I don't think it's a very far stretch to imagine that it would be the incident with her prince. Aside from giving us the reason why she's here at Otri Academy in the first place, this scene also does a lovely contrast with the chaos of the bells and the peace of Akio and Anthe. On the outside, they're very calm and cool and collected. On the inside, they've got a lot of chaos going on. The pan up over Utena's body not only shows us her in the male uniform, not only shows us that she has short hair this time around, but also does this cute trick that I love when a lot of directors do to hide the face of the main character, because it betrays the expectations, or, it's that thing of the disappearance where Haruhi busts down the door and says, kept you waiting, didn't I? And it's a small thing, but it makes it really cute. And the first lines of dialogue in the show mirror the first lines of the series itself. And it's quite obviously a callback to the opening of the series itself. Beyond that, you kind of set the scale and the tone of the show in these first couple lines. Lesbianism is A-okay. Utena's demeanor here is kind of copied and pasted straight from Haruka from Sailor Moon and how she acts around women, which is mostly understandable because that's one of the things that Ikehara loved in Sailor Moon. Furthermore, Wakaba and Utena have never met, so this is clearly a new retelling of this story. And Utena has just arrived. Now the movie takes an opportunity to exposit at us, which in true Ikehara fashion isn't a very clear exposition. We're given the name of Otri Academy through Eco and Fco. Now E being the English letter E and the suffix ko meaning child in Japanese. So it's kind of an odd call name on a radio to be E-child and F-child. Now, we already know through watching this film once and seeing the reveal at the ending that Eco and Fco are Utena and Anthe, if you remember the straw man at the end of the chase sequence. So let's kind of consider what they're saying through that lens of this is Utena talking to Anthe and vice versa. Or maybe perhaps the idea that it's their consciences or their internal monologues talking to each other. Iko seems positive and upbeat about the weather. She remarks that it would be a good day to eat outside, whereas Efko says that that would be inviting a capricious rain, and a very negative comment, actually. And then it's said that Efko got dumped, and she doesn't understand why. If we're matching these up with what we know about Utena and Anthe, I would say Utena would be the positive one, right? She got dumped again. Perhaps this could relate to Akio leaving in the scene in the tower, or perhaps it's something to do with her failed escape and kneeling before Dios in the Rose Garden. Regardless, it's clear that this character, and let's call her Anthe, is in a mind space where she is dwelling on this. And much like for any rational teenager, she's devising her worth from what other people think of her, and specifically a romantic involvement, which, ties in perfectly with the type of person Anthe is at the beginning of this film. Also, there's this other kind of cute line about scribbling mischief on your boyfriend's back unless he has swimming class the next day, and the swimming being drowning, and then Shiori scribbles on Toga's back. I suppose then it's kind of relevant that Iko says that because we've aligned her with Utena so far. So it just goes to show that even Utena is still in the mindset of what happened to Toga, if these are their subconscious thoughts. This shot is framed very well. First, let's think about movement. They're going down the stairs towards the duels, and the duels kind of representing the struggles or like people that are trapped in their idea of the prince. And that kind of contrasts with what we see later and we saw earlier, that the Rose Garden being up and upwards, kind of being like getting away from Otari Academy or rising above it. So we can kind of read the movement here as a descent into hell. But then you've got this lovely shot composition using the very stark shadows on the stairs to literally bifurcate Utena into light and darkness, which matches exactly with her clothes, giving her half dark and half pure white. And I take this as an indication that Utena has the white within her, the purity within her, as she obviously does, and kind of the driving force of the series, but she's still stuck within the darkness that she holds within her, which would be her needing to absolve herself of the idea of the prince re-Toga. And notice how perfectly the shot matches up with the line here. The second Wakaba hits prince, this shot goes from the half and half to painting Utena's face entirely into the shadow. This next scene here reminds me a lot of the introduction of Utena, in that it's sort of Ikahara teasing Juri and Miki in their introductions, figuring out how close to their selves they'll be and how they'll be introduced here. I don't think there's a whole lot aside from the action, but I want to point out the painterly backgrounds, how the lines scraping across the screen kind of seem like the bristles on a brush. And then, of course, the very high desaturation and the stark shadows, kind of symbolizing that everything's either black or white. Now, Wakaba's line of Juri being the prince doesn't elicit any reaction from Utena. That's a huge contrast from what we saw on the steps. Is it perhaps that whatever Utena defines as the prince, she doesn't see at all in Juri? To emphasize that fact, Miki doesn't even get his face in his own introduction. I do read Wakaba's line of maybe she'll be your rival as sort of a tease by Ikahara that this is a whole new world and we don't really know which way the story is going to be going. On the first shot of Toga and Utena's reaction to it, we get the nostalgic music, which, if you remember from the series, and I'm betting that Ikahara is asking you to, was always associated with the storybook or the retelling of Utena's past, and it's very nostalgic music in general. I think it's to signify, though, that this is a memory. And here Utena has the same reaction of the prince being shrouded on all sides by darkness, clearly being emotionally affected, but at the same time she snaps herself out of it, with a look like she had hope and then it was quashed. Could it be that she remembers that Toga is in fact dead? There's a thunderclap and a scene transition, kind of holding the headmaster's quarters ominously over everything that's happening down below. Remember, Anthe hasn't been introduced to the story yet, and one single raindrop on a red rose. That feels very much like a tear and then a torrent of tears to me. And trying to analyze the Red Rose in Revolutionary Girl Utena is probably the epitome of folly. We could go back to Rose of Versailles or shoujo tropes in general. We've already identified it as being somewhat connected to Anthe, and of course it means love in general. But we know what happens to the roses later in the film. They get exploded, washed away, invalued. What else gets made less or washed away? I would say that's very much the idea of the prince, or needing to understand the prince. Of course, we already seen Anthe submit to the idea of the prince in the intro, and the symbols in that scene? Rose petals falling all around her, and surrounded by roses. We know that Toga is going to represent the ideal of the prince to Utena, and here, it's enveloped by red roses. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's helpful for our discussion of semiotics here. Here's a quote from Ikehara where he's talking about the value of a heterosexual relationship and why he uses so much Yuri in his shows. Quote, "No, I'm still able to make a story where it's between a boy and a girl, but I feel irritated to see my girl getting together with some other guy. I've tried to kill off Tuxedo Mask and Sailor Moon many times, but no matter how many times I tried to kill him, he only gets resurrected, so I get angrier. So I decided it would be way better if the girl just didn't have a boyfriend to begin with. Of course I'm just kidding. In reality, if I have a guy in the show, the love relationship gets to have a bigger role in that show, and that would be an interesting element, but I wouldn't want to make that the scene stealer of the show. Most other shoujo shows are in that direction. It's about who and who are getting together, and who are breaking up. I thought that it would be a loss if the big motif, just because the girl was the main character. I think there could be more shows with other motives than that." End quote. If we take Tuxedo Mask to be kind of the shoujo representation of everything that a prince should be, then I think when Ikehara is talking about rejecting that idea, or at least rejecting the idea that that's the only way for a young girl to go about defining herself or living her life, in many ways he's using his experience coming off Sailor Moon as a launching point for how he wants to explore his concepts and his ideologies. But taking it back to the semiotics of everything, Tuxedo Mask, strong, reliable, intelligent, what's more the object of the fantasies of not only Asagi but all the Sailor Scouts, in every way the perfect boyfriend, always associated with a red rose. That's a good bit of evidence, not only from within the film itself and knowing what we know of the rest of the film, but also of the director's other works. And I haven't even brought in Penguin Drum yet. I think it's enough to at least lay a groundwork for one meaning behind the red rose in Revolutionary Girl Utena. So let's run with that idea and see where it takes us. Red rose equals idea of perfect love and prince, equals personal trauma, equals captive to the roses. Getting back to the film, we see that the crowds have gone, along with them all the life and the color. Rain means sadness in movies. Utena's footsteps echo, it's hollow, and she's panting and determined. If you remember, we see Utena in the first episode of the series dunk on 5 guys in a basketball game. And she's not panting. She doesn't even get winded. And this extended run sequence. Toga's stationary, he's not changing. Because he's dead. He doesn't need to move. In fact, he doesn't move once throughout the entire movie. It's because he's an idea. He's something that Utena's made up in her mind. He's an issue, a hurdle that she needs to overcome to escape the academy. And chasing down that idea, pinning it down and dealing with it, that takes more out of her than any physical exertion could ever do. So Utena and Toga's talk here. Well, before that, have you noticed that Toga's always associated with water in the film? For a guy who drowned, that's pretty funny. Anyway, the dialogue. Let's approach this as Utena talking to herself. After all, we know that this Toga is a manifestation of the idea of what Toga would be if he grew up and did not die. The capricious passing rain is in reference to eating lunch outside with Iko and Fko earlier, which again was more Utena talking to herself. So we can say that anything that Toga says is what Utena expects the idea of a prince to say to her. That is, this is a self-inflicted pressure. This is likely Utena's guilt made manifest. So if she's feeling guilty, then she would expect that person to latch on to the promises that she hasn't fulfilled. That seems very much in line with survivor's guilt. But when that's called out, she becomes defensive. She says she's not who she used to be. Which leads into why are you dressed like that and for the prince, implying that her change was her idea to live with high goals. Or before, when Toga drowned, She was not a person who lived with high goals. And we'll certainly talk more about high goals and what those mean. But I just want to say that the attitude of the defensiveness and the wanting to show that you've changed and that you have some identity that you've decided for yourself is so quintessentially adolescence. If any of you can remember being a teenager, you'll certainly remember this. I know I do. The line where I think she's bluffing, though, is I didn't come here hoping to find you. We've already seen that she sure as hell didn't come here to watch Jury and Mickey fight. And she sure as hell leaves as soon as she finds Toga or resolves Toga within herself. I think she very much does come here to find him. Otri Academy is a place where people come here to find or deal with whatever it is they struggle with. And this is a big one here, but it certainly makes sense. It's a pan over to the painting that we saw in the credits. We already mentioned earlier about how that relates to Utena and her issues with the rowboat. And close up now, we can clearly see the figure in the doorway as Dios with his red cape. Why is Utena surprised? She has this issue, this traumatic event in her past that's preventing her from moving forward. That is keeping her bound to the roses and to her idea of the prince. And is keeping her shame and her grief and her guilt as the driving motivation in her life. So she's come to this purgatory of Otri Academy. Looking for what in particular? There's no answer given. We certainly haven't seen Utena's objective. I think she's surprised because she doesn't realize it. She doesn't realize why she's here at Otri Academy. She doesn't realize how she needs to get over Toga. She doesn't know what that looks like. But she's decided to take action and do something. She can't yet be honest with herself or attack the issue. And Toga, while at the same time being both a figment of her imagination and this omniscient being who's holding all the answers to what she needs to resolve. Remember, that's all inside of herself. He humors her, says a rose for your high goals. We can read this as Utena giving credence or reaffirming her actions here. That Utena wants to improve, she wants to be better, and she wants to overcome. She just doesn't realize how yet. And I think that's what separates her from the chaff and what separates all the duelists. That's what the ring symbolizes, not the high goals in and of themselves, but the struggle to overcome, and the desire to be free. Do you remember when the rest of the duelists ride the Wakaba Jeep to catch up with her during the chase scene? And they say, well, you go on ahead, we'll catch up later. I think that all the students at Otri Academy have a cross to bear, but only a few embrace it and try to be better for it, instead of constructing a world where it's okay and normal, and then being satisfied living within it. I feel more confident in that than I do in analyzing Utena's high goals. Her nobility is a much bigger thing in this series. It's still very relevant here when we get into the sexuality of everything. But is her nobility the catalyst that lets her be the one to escape the bonds of the prince in Otri Academy? Is it her nobility that transfers over to Anthe and allows her to rise above as well? Does the movie point that out in any way? Let's keep that in mind as we go along. Well, we've talked for 30 minutes about the first 11 minutes of the film. Let's continue with the first duel in the Rose Garden when we come back.